Reimagining Success, episode 212. You're listening to the Reimagining Success podcast, where we help you design a business and a life that allows you freedom from the 9 to 5. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, ex-corporate good girl, now a business mentor and coach, author, mum of 2, and I'm here to help you create more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment. Now let's get started with redefining success outside of the 9 to 5. Hello and welcome back as we are officially nearing the end of 2022. We're well into December, just a few more weeks to go. And so what better time to look back over this past year? Now, I ran the business strategy session a few weeks ago for the Business Accelerator, and I opened that up actually this year to non-accelerator members, which was exciting. And we looked at planning out next year from a business perspective. It was pretty hardcore. I had one client who said she had a nap afterwards, which I take as a positive, and someone else who said that their mind was whirling, but they had all their ducks in a row now and their strategy lined up for next year. So that's all good news. But as part of that strategy session, of course, we looked back over 2022 quite briefly, but it is really important to look back in order to be able to look forward. So depending on how robust your plans were, I suppose, for this past year, you can do a more or less robust review. Because, of course, if you had really clear goals, if you had a big picture theme, if you set yourself frameworks and metrics and so on, it's much easier then to see exactly how you've done. If you've been a bit more vague, or if you haven't had a plan at all, then of course it'll be a bit more subjective in terms of qualitatively assessing how you've done. But I wanted to guide you today through a little exercise. So if you can grab a pen and paper, that would be great. If not, then, I always listen to podcasts when I'm running or driving, or whatever. So if you're like me, then by all means listen to it now, but come back and listen to it again, because it really is a practical session. So yes, of course, you can work through it theoretically in your head, but I do think it's interesting to write it down and to look at it and then to see where that takes you. Of course, we'll be back next week to look ahead to 2023. And in both sessions, I'm going to be here doing it with you, sharing very openly what's gone well for me, what hasn't gone so well, just to illustrate, how it can look in practice. So without further ado, the first question for you, and I'm going to try not to have too many big silences on this, but I also want to give you the space to reflect. So probably if you're listening to it for the second time, certainly you'll want to pause and then answer the question. But in the meantime, I'll just give you a little bit of space to be able to answer the question without having hours and hours of silence on the recording, because I don't think that's helpful. So the big question is, how do you feel about 2022, right? Just spontaneous gut feel. How do you feel 22 has gone? Whether it's from a business perspective, career perspective, personal perspective, romance perspective, whatever, right? Big picture overall, are you feeling relieved, happy, excited, proud, disappointed? Anything goes. How are you feeling about 2022 overall? So for me, on balance, I feel pretty positive. I've put my health and physical fitness and so on first. I've been very present with my family, had some really lovely trips and lovely, most importantly, little minutes and moments and excursions and so on in between. From a work perspective, I've almost finished my book, which is very exciting. Hopefully when this comes out, maybe even it is published. I launched my course earlier in the year, and both of those two things have, let's be honest, been on my to-do list for a very long time. So that feels pretty good. And yet, I can certainly do better, right? But that's my general on-balance feeling. I'm feeling pretty positive. There are things I can do better, and we'll get into this. But overall, I feel quite positive. If you do, that's great. If you don't, and believe me, I've had years when I've felt very negative overall, then that's fine. The good thing here is that you have the awareness, and that gives you a platform then to look ahead to change things for next year, right? And that's why we're here. So overall, how do you feel? Then if you've been part of my community for a while, you'll be familiar with my 5 L's model. If you're new, perhaps you've just come across this episode or you've just started listening, let me just walk you through this quickly. And everyone else who is familiar, I'm sure you can do with a reminder. But the 5 L's are live, love, learn, lead, laugh. And I love a bit of alliteration. I'll tell you what each of these means, but it's an overall model designed to help you to think about success, think about balance, think about goals in a more holistic way. So you're no longer just thinking about the narrow work domain. So, when I answered the overall question, I didn't just talk about sales and revenue and only the book and course and clients and so on, right? I thought about my health and family and so on. So the intention is to move away from just the narrow work domain and to think about the different priorities in life that need attention in order for you to feel good, happy, fulfilled, successful. So again, live, love, learn, lead, laugh. Live is your health and well-being. Love is your relationships and belonging. Learn, development and growth. Lead, career and impact. And laugh, fun and spontaneity. And I'll say before digging into each of these, if you do want to double click on them and get help in assessing each of these areas, I do have a free assessment that has, I don't want to call it a scorecard because it's not about getting a score out of 10, but there are 10 questions on each of the 5 areas. You can tick the box and then, yes, of course, you can add them up, but it's supposed to give you an indication of the kind of things you could be considering. And so you can see quite quickly if there are big gaps or if something's looking pretty good. So that's at onestepoutside.com/success, onestepoutside.com/success. But let's take the first one, live, health and well-being. Looking back over 2022, how has it been? So it can be, of course, your physical health, your mental health. It can be how you've prioritized it, what you've done exercise-wise, eating. It can, of course, be if you've had illness and so on. Some things are in your control, some things not so much. In my case, knock on wood, over the summer and the last few months at least, our kids haven't been so ill. In the previous 6 months, 9 months, we were getting the phone call from nursery pretty much every week saying we had to come and pick them up. And knock on wood, that hasn't been the case. That's actually hugely positive. I really want to celebrate that. I've also worked with a personal trainer and nutritionist for the last, I want to say 18 months, almost 2 years now. I hit my weight target, which was pretty, I had actually shifted it 2 or 3 times, so it was lower than I ever thought I would get back to. It was kind of an idealistic, 20s weight target when I was age 20 or so. So that was one thing. And I also ran a half marathon pretty last minute last month, and I got my fastest personal best by about 20 minutes, even though I didn't even have a tracker or a timer or a watch that works. So that was huge, I also, on the mental health piece, started therapy, actually. I started a few weeks ago working with a therapist, which has been an interesting experience for me, digging into some childhood stuff and some things that are going on now. And also, just from the experience of experiencing therapy for the first time versus coaching, because they are 2 different things. And it's really interesting to see that distinction. So that's briefly for me on health and well-being. But again, for you, how has 2022 been in terms of the results, the outcomes, as it were, but also in terms of the input? So, do you feel that you have put in the effort to take care of your health? I spoke to someone the other day who's been really prioritizing their the other way around, mental health, perhaps not physical. Often it's the other way around. So we're really thinking about those different areas. Maybe your emotional well-being, in terms of your social network and so on, which we'll also talk about in the next one. But live, health and well-being. So again, if you do want to spend more time on this, which I do encourage you to do, please pause and reflect on this now. We'll come back later. The second L is love, so relationships and belonging. And yes, romance is on there, but it's not just about romance. It's whatever that means to you. If you're single, if you want to meet someone, if you've been dating, if you're going through a divorce, whatever your particular situation, but romantically. But it's also about your family, whatever your family looks like, and friends and so on. So for me, I was thinking back, I've certainly had some challenges this year. Obviously, kind of post-pandemic, things have been a bit tricky for everybody still socially. But we moved down to Poole, Dorset last year, so a year and a half ago, my goodness, almost 2 years soon. And we have been making friends locally, so that's exciting. We joined now a sports club. We've got friends from nursery. That's been really fun. I'm off to the theatre tonight with one of my mum friends, so that's great. We've had a bit more time with my sister and her kids. We hadn't seen them so much before. And we've seen them at half term. We've seen them with my parents. We've seen them in various occasions. So that's been really special. And professionally, I joined a mastermind group actually this year, which was a fantastic community. So I've been really valuing that. And we're meeting. Probably as we speak now, I might be having a coffee with them in London. So that's really exciting too. So in the area of relationships, personal, family, romance, platonic, professional, engaging in your local community, how do you feel 2022 has gone? The third area is learn, development and growth. So this is about personal and professional development. It could be working with a coach. Maybe you've worked through one of my programs, a course, for example. Have you been reading books, Audible, Kindle, paperback, whatever your preferred format? Have you done courses, professional qualifications? Have you been learning a language? I've got a new one that I can add here. I'm seeing at my notes. So I started Duolingo. I think I'm on to sort of day 40 or so of my streak. I never really got into it in the past because it was far too easy for me. But I've managed to jump now in the Spanish to a point where actually it's getting a bit tricky. So it's becoming more interesting and challenging. So a little bit of Spanish learning. I started tennis coaching. I'm into my second term now, which I'm finishing. I'll continue that as well. And I did a couple of coaching courses actually early on in the year. And so that was more from the professional development space. This year for me hasn't been an investment year. It's actually been more cutting costs and so on. And yet learning is always such an important priority. So, I've certainly been reading, listening to podcasts, Audible, attending workshops and all sorts, right? So there are plenty of things there. And you certainly, if you're starting out, hopefully have been doing a lot of learning, but perhaps you've been doing too much learning. So, it could also be you're feeling overwhelmed, you're doing all these courses and so on, you're following lots of, experts, but you're not actually implementing it. So that's important to bear in mind too. Lead, career and impact. Now, this is obviously the big focus that we usually tend to look at. It is your business, it is your career development and so on. And it can be disappointing in terms of perhaps things like sales and revenue, but again and again, I speak to clients, who feel frustrated. And yet when you actually take the time to look back, they've come so far. And I'm just thinking recently about the metaphor, the comparison of a child, a baby, a toddler, the amount of things they have to learn in terms of walking and talking and eating and the entire universe, right? It's just a little bit the same when we're starting a business, when we're doing something totally different. The learning curve at the beginning is so steep. There are so many things. For me, within a year or so, certainly if I go back now, years and years, I had no idea what podcasting was. I probably barely knew what coaching was when I first started. So the fact that I now have all these email sequences and affiliate links and the website funnels and podcasts and masterclasses and all these things and books and everything is just, the mind boggles. So in terms of what you've learned, in terms of what you've implemented, even if you're not yet seeing the actual rewards from that in terms of sales, money, and so on, please do celebrate and look at the impact you've made. So for me, there are a few sort of mindset shifts actually, really. I've also tried to simplify my content creation because it can get very easily, that you're sort of on this hamster wheel of content creation. I was doing, we experiment with different models, but lots of reels and so on Instagram and daily posts, and then also LinkedIn and the Facebook group and so on. And I've tried to pull back on some of those, simplify and focus more on LinkedIn actually and more on thought leadership. So we'll see how that goes. I've also been seeing my B2B income stream of the business really growing organically, and I'm interested in seeing where that goes. And I've got some ideas for next year. We'll talk about that next week. And of course, again, I must celebrate again my book and my course. So that's for me, in brief, the area of lead, career and impact. So how have you done in that area in terms of doing meaningful work, career progression, making progress with your business? Sorry, the book is clearly on my mind. Making progress with your business. And by the way, if you have faced redundancy, if you have had to go back to a job because your business hasn't been working, again, we're not judging here. We're just assessing neutrally. It can be disappointing, but we know where we are. We know where the baseline is, and then we can look ahead to next year, what we're going to do differently. And often some of these things are out of our control as well, right? So it's important to be empathetic with yourself, compassionate. Finally, laugh, fun and spontaneity. So this is what Eve Rodsky, I think, calls unicorn space. It's that creativity, having fun, being yourself. It could be hobbies and all sorts, right? So for me, I think tennis comes back into that again. I had my birthday dinner out, which was exciting. I think it was my first night out. We've had a couple of kind of weddings and 80th birthdays and things away from the kids, but this was sort of my first just for me dinner out at a really lovely restaurant here in Poole with friends. I had a day out with one of my mum friends, if I can call her that, but she's a real friend. When we went to Swanage, we had this gorgeous sweet Cornish pasty with like apple, rhubarb and custard. It's so good. I don't like savoury Cornish pasties, but this one, I went to this incredible seafood restaurant with a view and wine. Oh, it was such a dreamy day, and what a luxury. Something that you'd take for granted back in the day. I just haven't done in so long. Also been to Sweden a couple of times, and we went to Spain. Lots of little fun things. It's all about the little moments, right? It's not just the big things. And recently, I'm going to add that to the list too. I've just started picking up my ukulele again, because I learned that in Hawaii years ago during my hippy-dippy nomad phase. So I've brought that back as a reminder of my pre-kids and pre-settling down life. So those are the live, love, learn, lead, laugh. How was 2022 for you? A couple more questions for you. The first one is, what do you want to celebrate? So, I've created that course. It feels like a long time ago now, and I don't really celebrate it anymore, but it was huge. It's taken me years to want to have that course there, not to mention years of coming up with the content and the frameworks and the thinking that's gone into it. The tech and so on was a massive barrier. Creating the content, recording it all, getting it up there. We've moved to a different membership site as well. So that was a huge endeavour. So that's massive. My book, again, I've really gone from blank page to 250, whatever it is, pages now. I'm hugely proud of that. And it's such an amazing resource. It's going to really fill a gap in my business model and really provide an incredible kind of business card and resource for people who don't necessarily or can't necessarily afford to work with me directly. And why not celebrate my fastest half marathon as well? I think, again, it was just kind of a relatively last minute endeavour. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But that was huge. I'd been running consistently. It was a really fun day and it went really well. So I'm really glad I committed to that. So really important. What do you want to celebrate? In terms of outcomes, if you can, but above all, in terms of input, which is the effort you've made, the things you've done, shifting your mindset, signing up to learn things, making an effort, putting yourself out there, getting out of your comfort zone. So what do you want to celebrate? And by the way, I would love it if you actually did celebrate, meaning get yourself a massage, go out for a drink with a friend, buy something you wouldn't normally buy, have an indulgent chocolate pie, whatever it is that feels for you celebratory, but make sure it's specifically for that achievement. And then finally, I leave you the question, and we'll segue nicely into next week's episode. What do I want to do differently? So if you want a different outcome, you're going to need to do a different input, right? You're going to need to change things in terms of the actions you're taking, where you're prioritizing, what you're spending your time on, how much time, what you're doing, how, when, and so on, right? So you can't just keep doing the same things and expect a different outcome. That is the sign of madness, as we know. So what do you want to do differently? What results do you want next year? What different results do you want? And what do you want to make sure doesn't happen? I guess looking ahead a year from now, if you've had disappointments overall, if you've had disappointments in one of the 5 areas, one or more, then where do you want to make sure you're really putting your focus next year to get different results? So I'll leave you there for now. I hope that was helpful. Again, do go back, grab a pen and paper, work through it properly. It's one of those episodes that's not just for listening, but actually for doing, implementing. And then we'll be back next week to look at 2023. I'll see you then. Bye for now. Explore a broader definition of success with my free assessment to consider what success really means to you across different areas of your life. Evaluate where you are today and prioritise the right goals to get you to where you want to be. Get your copy at onestepoutside.com/success. That's onestepoutside.com/success.